So, great morning, everybody. It's so good to see you here for our BMG. Today's topic is on self-love. Instead of me diving in immediately and telling a story like I normally do, I would love to go around the room and just really quickly hear what your definition is for self-love. So, if really quickly we can just go around and I'll just kind of pass it to Bob first because you are the first person on my screen. Again, what we're going to do, we're just going to go around really quickly and share a word or a couple sentences about what self-love means to you, starting with Bob.
Yeah, so thanks. It's what I always say about love. It's unconditional. So I always strive for unconditional love for everyone that I meet. And then one day I said I have to have self-love, and that meant unconditionally loving myself. However I show up in every moment of every day, the rest of my life, I will love myself unconditionally. There's no condition on loving myself. None. I don't have to choose anything. I just have to be.
Perfect. Perfect. Marlene, would love to hear what is your definition of self-love?
Good morning, everyone. The biggest breakthrough for me came when I was sitting quietly and I realized that I cannot sit and say that I love God and I love my fellow brethren when I do not love myself. It goes hand in hand. It's like I'm telling God and everyone else that they really don't really matter because I don't matter to myself. So it comes back to what Bob just said, the self-love, but it was a breakthrough moment.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank
Carissa, what is self-love to you?
I think for me, it's just pretty simple. I think we're all, when we're raised with good morals and values, our parents and the people we look up to always teach us to treat others as we would like to be treated, but we often forget to, have that resonate in our own lives with ourselves. So for me, I've gone through a lot of personal and life changes over the last year, and I think I just have, remembered to show myself grace, forgiveness, kindness, and just remember that sometimes we're our biggest critic and we have to give ourselves a little bit of just a little bit of slack sometimes to know that we're human and we just want to grow and be better. So just remembering that showing yourself love is just as important as showing it to others.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Ashley, how about you?
I had like this ironed out and then I started to hear everyone else. And so now I'm like trying to remember what I was thinking. And the first thing that comes to mind is taking care of myself, maintaining the commitments that I make to myself for my benefit. And then sort of similar to what everyone else is saying, treating myself the same way that I shoot to treat other people, which is, with love and kindness and grace. And so I think oftentimes I'll forget to do that to myself. So for myself, so keeping that at the forefront.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Brendan, how about you? How do you define self-love?
Lost my mouse. Often I always joke with people. I think Keegan, I even joked with you, like I would never talk to Keegan the way I talk to myself. And I think that for me, self-love is not having those conversations with myself anymore because I'm past it and I know who I am and I actually love myself.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Last but not least, Andrea, would love to hear your definition of self-love.
Often in flux with core principles. Being smarty. I think for me, self-love is the ability to truly love the self, and not in that kind of egoic sense, but that where I understand what my value really is, and then honoring that. And when I say honoring that, I really mean like being truthful to that no matter where I'm at or whom I am with in the world. Because I think that we're often swayed by the circumstances or the society, the social structures that we're in, or even friends and family that we're close to. We're kind of swayed implicitly and sometimes explicitly to be something other than we are. And for me, self-love means being true to myself, regardless of what it is, whether it means, okay, I need to get more sleep, or I need to exercise more, or I am holding true to my set of values. Does that make sense the way I've worded it?
Absolutely. Beautifully said. A lot of
Thank you.
nuggets in that.
Yep.
Miles, so you just hopped in. So real quick, last but not least, we are going around sharing what our definition of self-love is.
Self-love to me is really just honesty with yourself. Keeping the promises that you make, like when you say you're going to do something, doing it, but then also having tenderness and understanding for yourself, sort of allowing yourself the space to not be your ideal image of who you'd like to be. In a way, I feel like self-love is this circular game of like playing parent and child for yourself, and walking through that journey.
Excellent. Love it, guys. Love it. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. So you may have guessed already, but our talk today is on self-love. And it's so fascinating for me to hear everybody's definition, because everybody had a little bit of a different take on it. But for me, everybody had some expression of a form of awareness. You know, you got to realize that when we go out into the world, all living things are made of two things: energy and matter. All the time I hear people say, oh, that person has high energy. You don't have high energy. It's an expression of your energy. Love is part of that expression. And we have to realize that the way that we express our love outwardly is a reflection of the way that we view ourselves inwardly. And so there's so much value in this. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the PDF. So again, if you can go ahead and print that out or just pull it up on your screen really quickly. Can everybody see this okay? Okay, awesome. So here's the thing, guys. Everybody had a little bit of a different definition, but hold on to whatever stands out to you. Maybe you can pull from somebody else's, or you can add on to what you've already listed. The big thing here that I want you to consider for just a quick moment is, and Brennan, you said this really well, right? Is often we get into this place of critical self-talk, defeating self-talk. So I want you to think about where you are right now based on your definition of self-love. Where are you right now? And what is the gap between where you are now and where you know you should be? Just think about that for a quick second. Where is that gap from where you are today to where you should be in your journey of self-love? And so as you'll realize, you may be in a different place. Maybe you're going through a transition. Maybe you just went through a move. Maybe you just went through a tough breakup. Whatever it is, you've got to find that self-love. And so here's a really quick exercise. Now, this exercise is applicable to a plethora of different opportunities. But in this particular one, we're focusing on the gap, right? We're focusing on the gap from where we are in our self-love journey. So very simple. On the left-hand side, again, if you're going through a transition, what are some of the things that you want to take with you? Maybe you had very good clarity and self-actualization, self-awareness in that previous journey. You want to take that awareness with you. On the far right side, these are the things you want to leave behind. Maybe some things didn't go the way that you had planned. Maybe that breakup was not smooth. Maybe you took a new job opportunity. Whatever it is, what are the things that you want to leave behind? Now, again, we're talking about our own self-love. How many people have heard this quote before, that you can only love people to the degree in which you love yourself? Has anybody heard that or something similar to that? A lot of people get that thrown around, right? The truth is, what we're really saying there is that we have to have that awareness. We have to have that actualization. If we don't express and love ourselves to a certain degree, then what happens? We become a people pleaser. We let people walk all over us. We don't hold boundaries appropriately. That is the way that we allow people to treat us. And it comes back to the way that we treat ourselves. So again, this graph is a good way to realize the gap of where you were to where you want to be. So we talked about the left side, everything you want to take with you. We talked about the right side, everything you want to leave behind. Now the center, these are the things that you're not certain of. You don't know if you want to take them with you or leave them behind. You may be able to identify these and spend a little bit more time clarifying or ironing these out. So before we move on, I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts, questions, comments on this graph, or if you see any other ways that this could be applicable. And go ahead and shout out, Brennan.
Can you give a couple of, maybe an example of each one?
Yeah. Okay, so great. So let's say, all right, we're talking about self-love. Okay, so I'm just going to say the journey of purchasing a house. Now, this isn't immediately recent, but let's say that we're going through this process of purchasing the house. Okay, we go to make an offer on the house and it falls through. And then what? We start to beat ourselves up. We have this critical self-talk. Oh my gosh, maybe if I had showed up a little bit early, maybe if I made more calls, maybe if I did this, we get into that self-defeating talk. But you know what? Through this process, I took a lot of initiative. I got out of my comfort zone. I spoke to some people that I didn't really want to or wouldn't have previously. I want to take that with me. That's something that I'm proud of through this journey of purchasing the house that I want to take with me, getting out of my comfort zone, having uncomfortable conversations, and realizing that this is an expression of self-love, because the way that we love ourselves is the way that we share that love with the world, right? All right, so talking about the leave it. Okay, going through this process of buying the house, there's so much that's out of your control. Let's say we didn't get the house we wanted. Then we start to defeat ourselves. We start to get into that talk, right? Oh my gosh, you could have done this. That's something that you want to leave behind, the self-defeating negative talk, right? So what we're taking with us was getting out of the comfort zone. We liked that about this process of the self-love. What we're leaving behind is the self-defeating talk. Now that middle column, the take it or leave it, these are the things we're uncertain of. So maybe we did have a good internal conversation, but we didn't take it all the way through the finish line to really get through that self-actualization. So that's something in the middle that there is good there, but there's also work and opportunity to develop these skills. Okay, so if we're taking a step back and looking at this situation for what it is, we go to buy a house. Well, this is a process of a lot of internal conversations, right? So we want to take getting out of the comfort zone. We want to leave that negative dialect internally. And then in the center, these are the things that we're not 100% certain of. Maybe we can iron this out and make it a little more clear so we can take it with us. Does that help?
That does help.
Awesome. Anybody else? Any questions, comments, any maybe story or how you've used something similar to this in the past? Andrea?
Not a question so much as a comment, Keek. I love that you're doing this exercise this morning, given my recent journeys. And I love the topic of self-love. That's one of my favorites, actually. But this take it or leave it exercise with that middle column is something I've actually didn't think of it in an exercise like this, but it is the kind of questioning I've asked myself as I've moved from one area of the United States to another with 3 little ones. And the question of take it or leave it has been not just about items, because I really had to think about that too. It has been about what practices and habits and structures do I want to keep, and which ones do I want to leave and revamp, because a move is, though challenging, one of the most optimal times to do it, because everything's new and unfamiliar anyway. So you kind of start from the ground up. And so there was a lot of leave it's for me. Some of them kind of bittersweet, to be honest, and bringing something new in with that practice of take it or leave it. And so I guess my point that I'm getting to is like that take it or leave it in the way you framed it this morning as physical, emotional, habitual, like there's a spectrum there that I just love that you're bringing in. And I see myself doing that without having realized that I'm doing it. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I think that brings up a really, really good point. One of my favorite quotes, environment is stronger than heredity. So let's take, for example, somebody that's raised in a household where they have 2 parents that are overweight. That is environment. The diet, the sleep, the water. If you were to change that environment, the heredity is still there, right? You still have 2 overweight parents, but the environment changes, which allows you to grow and expand. And so you're going through this period, Andrea, of moving, right? And so, yeah, there's physical things that you could decide to take or leave, but also the emotional and habitual side. And that ties back into the environment because, like you said, what a fantastic opportunity to recreate or restructure a conducive environment, to be able to set things up that strategically push you and your children forward to these goals. And so I love that concept of you breaking up environment, emotional, and then the habitual. You know, those all tie into this self-love component, right? So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else before we shift? Okay, awesome. So here are really the 3 nuggets that I want you guys to take away. And I know you guys are going to have a ton to share on this. I want to get through this really quickly and then open it up to the group. These are very, very large topics. You're going to realize we're not putting these under a microscope. We're generally addressing what these convey. Okay. So again, we're not going into too much depth here. If you do want more depth on these topics, please reach out to myself and we'll talk about this separately. 3 steps, very simple in self-love. Number 1, you got to create a plan. Okay. You've got to create a plan. What does that look like for you? Ashley's definition of self-love is going to be different than Marlene's, which is going to be different than Miles. That's fine. It should be. But you've got to know what that looks like. So before you can even create that plan, there are really 2 steps that come up before this. Number 1, you've got to face the moment. You have to sit there and actually look at the moment for what it is, right? Not with heightened emotion, but detach emotionally, look at the moment. Okay, let's put this in context for self-love. Maybe you just had self-defeating talk and you were really beating yourself up. And then you got in this emotional loop and you stayed there for a day or even a whole week. Well, first you got to face it. You got to face that moment. Look, it's in the past. Please, if anybody in here has figured out time travel, let me know. I'd love to go back in the past, but the truth is we can't go back in the past and change it. So you got to face the moment and deal with it. Once you've faced it, that's where you deal with it. That's part 2. You've got to deal with it. You've got to take it head on. Okay. Once you've taken those 2 steps, you've seen the moment for what it is, you've dealt with it. Now we create a plan. And when we create our plan, really what we're saying is we're creating the new model. Often when we go through life, we have a model that we live on. It's not about restructuring the model that we've created. It's about creating a whole new model. Okay. So what we're saying here is the previous model of our self-love, it didn't work. We're beating ourselves up. We get caught in these loops and these patterns. We got to create a new model. So we faced the previous model. We dealt with it. Now we're creating our plan. We're creating our vision for what we want it to look like for our new model. So when we're looking at this plan, we have to say, what are the areas that need the most attention? Okay. Maybe it is that critical self-talk. Maybe it's the way that we speak to ourselves. Maybe it is our sleep pattern and we're just not giving ourselves appropriate sleep. It could be 100 different areas. You know what it is and it's specific to you. But what are the areas that need the most attention right now? So just jot 1 to 3 of these things down, the areas that need the most attention in your self-love journey. The flip side of that, what's going really well? What are you doing that you want to hold on to? What areas of your self-love do you recognize that you do well? And this might sound funny, but maybe you wake up in the morning and you look yourself in the mirror and you're like, man, I look good today, right? And you want to carry that with you. What are the moments that you're doing well? In reflection, the elite performers, the people that get the best results, they look at both sides, the good and the bad. They take the good and they get extra mileage out of it. They take the bad and they create the new model. They learn how to do better and they take opportunities from it. Okay, so you got to have that plan moving forward. And again, you can't just take this massive plan. You have to break it down into baby steps, bite-sized pieces. Any questions on this before we go to boundaries? Andrea?
What about all also taking the bad and not building just a new model, but also taking the most from the bad. Does that make sense the way I've said it?
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
We tend to take the good and we kind of soak it up and learn from it and kind of embrace it, right? And the bad, we tend to push away and go, okay, this is where I can correct. But what I've discovered for myself is that often in the bad, there's some good. And I don't want to just push it away because then I'm going to miss the silver lining that's within the bad. Does that make sense?
100%. So here's what you have to realize, guys. There's a story, and I'm not going to share the story because it'll take too long. But the bottom line is that this too shall pass. Okay, this too shall pass. Whatever you're going through right now, this too shall pass. That's in both good and bad. And so directly to Andrea's point, when you go through bad experiences, adversity, trauma, obstacles, whatever you want to call it, when you go through those things, we can't just ignore it and put it to the side and forget about it, right? That's not good for us. But also, we can't sit and fester on it either. So there's this fine balance in the middle where we take the learnings, the lessons, the opportunities from the bad, and we embrace them and address them and recognize them, but we don't let it control our state of being. So here are 3 really, really simple questions you can ask yourself in these adverse moments. Question number 1, what can I learn from this? Take a bad moment or a difficult moment and ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Second question, what is the opportunity here? In all bad, there is a silver lining. I promise you, just like Andrea said, whenever you go through difficult moments, it is usually preventing you from something so you can get something better. So what can I learn from this? What is the opportunity here? And the third question, how can I use this to impact somebody else? How can I use this to impact somebody else? Now, even when you're going through difficult moments, you ask yourselves those 3 questions and it sparks optimism in you. And that's really what the key is here. So great question. I love that you brought that up. And yes, we absolutely have to face the bad and address the bad. We just don't want to stay there. So we can ask ourselves those 3 questions to soak up and pull the good out of the bad scenarios and then take that and move on. Any other thoughts or questions before we go next?
Just very quickly. I just kind of rephrased the way I've been thinking about this, and I answered this question: where am I not loving myself, and where is that showing up? And things like weight, exercise, sex, money, power, eating all came up. How is not loving myself affecting my weight, my physical ability, my exercise, my sex, how much money I'm making, how much power and influence I have on the world, and my eating. So it kind of where is my not self-love showing up in my life? Not what love is, but where is it not? What kind of effect is having when I don't love myself? In what areas?
And I absolutely love that, Bob. Now, I got to be really, really clear with everybody on the group or people listening to this. Bob has been immersed in personal development and self-mastery for decades, okay? So you have to realize that what he just shared comes from a high stance of self-actualization. Some people on this call or people listening to this might go, well, holy heck, how do I get to that place? I'm not even there yet. So you got to realize that absolutely everything Bob just said, 100% valid, but you might not be there yet, and that's okay. I would define what Bob just said as self-actualization, being able to recognize the emotions, the influences, the exterior motives, the things that are contributing to that overall confidence in other areas of life. How does my self-love show up in my love life, in my work, in my conversation, in any aspect of life? And so you're absolutely right, Bob. To get to that place, it is going to take 2 approaches. Either extreme introverted approach, which is journaling, recording videos, doing that self-work, or an extroverted approach, which is speaking it out with somebody. Some people need both, Some people do really well with just one over the other. Test it out, figure out what's good for you. But you're absolutely right, Bob. To get to that place, to create a solid plan, to know where we need to go, we have to have that self-actualization. You're going to get to that place by taking an introverted approach or an extroverted approach. It's not just going to show up in your mind. It takes work. Thank you for sharing, Bob. All right. So anybody else before we go on to part 2? Okay, cool. So here's the deal, guys. When we're talking about boundaries, we're not going to be able to go in depth and do a whole thing on boundaries. I do have a course on this. So if anybody wants to go down this road, we absolutely can. But for sake of time right now, we just need to define what these are. I want to share the quote up top again really quickly before we do this. Love yourself enough to set boundaries. Your time and energy are precious. You get to choose how you use it. You teach people how to treat you by deciding what you will and won't accept. Okay? Here's the deal, guys. Everybody on this call has boundaries. You may not enforce them, but we all have them. Okay? That expression of your boundaries is the way that you want to be treated. Sometimes people get caught up in the fear of criticism. What is somebody else going to say, feel, think, or do based on my expression of my boundary? That's not up to you to figure out. So again, we're not going in depth on boundaries here. We're just starting with part number 1. Part number 1 is simply to understand what boundaries are. Does anybody on here know what the Mason-Dixon line is? Yeah. Okay. That was like a hard no, but so everybody's heard of the Mason-Dixon line, right? We all know what the Mason-Dixon line is. And just for a real quick history lesson, the Mason-Dixon line divides the North and South for when we had the Civil War, right? And so what it did was it broke up the ideologies from one side to the other side. Now, the interesting thing is this was only touching several states, right? And so that is the line there. And it's still there to this day in between Pennsylvania and Maryland. But the crazy thing is, it actually represents absolutely nothing but a outdated ideology. But it still stands there, and people still know that this divides the Yankees and the Confederates. That simple line, literally in some parts, weathered stone that just sits on a ground, that is a physical representation of one side's ideologies and the other side's ideologies. When we talk about boundaries and self-love, when we talk about that in a non-physical presence, there are two sides here. You still have the physical boundaries, but you also have the mental or emotional boundaries. Okay. So you got to know what these are before you can outwardly express them. Now, again, there's a whole nother talk about setting up an appropriate conversation to express your boundaries, have that understood by both parties and implemented moving forward. Right now, we're just defining them. So can anybody in here give me an example of one of your physical boundaries and just shout it out? What's an example of one of your physical boundaries?
I'll share. This one is going to be specific to me as a parent, and this is going to sound funny, but I go to the bathroom alone. So like my children are not following me into the bathroom. I'm closing the door, even if they stand outside and like bang down the door or cry. I'm going alone.
It's a great example. Great example. That's a physical boundary. Does anybody else have one they'd like to share? Okay. Let's go
Keegan, one of mine, I don't like people being super close to me in a conversation because it makes me feel like it's getting ready to be confrontational. So there's literally a physical, I don't get all up on you, don't get all up on me.
Great example, right? Great example. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody have an example of a mental or emotional boundary?
During some recent family interaction, certain subjects are just not on the table out of respect to the validity that some of them can reach. And it isn't because somebody's trying to be mean, it's just that they get all riled up, and politics is a biggie. So yeah, some subjects off the table.
That's great. Great example. By the way, I thought for the longest time that politics and religion were just American things that we didn't talk about. You know, it wasn't common practice to talk about these in public settings, but this is like a global thing. I've gone to a lot of other countries, and it's the same ideology there in most other countries. So anyway, I think that when we come back to boundaries, this is all about self-love. Okay. When you are loving yourself, often we hold boundaries, physical and emotional boundaries, that we know are inherent to us, but we don't ever express them to anybody. And so how can somebody on the other side know what our boundaries are if we never tell them? So there is a delicate process of sharing boundaries. Now, what you have to do is you have to detach emotionally and step back for a quick second. Realize that when you express a boundary, what you're simply saying here is these are what I tolerate or don't tolerate. Okay. And this is a healthy thing to do. Again, people typically don't do this because you get stuck behind that fear of what? Criticism. What will the other person say, think, feel, or do based on what I share? It's not your responsibility to interpret what they say, think, feel, or do. This is your boundary. Now, we do this delicately and from a place of understanding, but again, this is part of your self-love practice. So any questions, thoughts, comments on the boundaries specifically before we move on? Andrea?
More of a comment / share. I don't know if anybody in the group is familiar with the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, but I love that book because what it does for me, what it's practicing those principles in my life, what it's done for me is make it this complication that a lot of people have with boundaries almost nil, because when I step into the space of truly not taking things personally, which is one of the four agreements, not taking it personally, understanding that everybody is responding to me through a lens of their experience and it's not about me, like really owning that has made a profound difference in my life and how I communicate with other people. I mean, it means basically that people can really say almost anything to me. In fact, some of the people I work with are very surprised with that freedom because they're hesitating. They're waiting for me to have some reaction. And when that doesn't happen, they're like, is this cool? I'm like, yeah. And I invite more. But what happens from that freedom really is this space for people to grow, right? And so it comes back to me really owning where I am in myself and being okay and understanding that it's not about me. Someone is speaking from the space of their own experience base. It's not a judgment of me. So having that self-awareness. So I want to share that for the group if they didn't know, because I found it to be a very profound difference maker in my own life.
Fantastic. You brought up several really good points. By the way, if you haven't read the Four Agreements, I highly encourage you to do so. One of my big takeaways from the Four Agreements and something you just shared there, Andrea, is what he terms as black magic. So black magic is this concept, and we can think of this specifically as a parent. Let's just say, for example, that you're a parent, right? And you had a really bad day, and your child comes to speak to you, and in your heightened emotion, you were reactionary, and you say something based on that day, but it doesn't really have anything to do with your child, right? So for example, I'll give you a quick example here. There in the story, the mother is going through a really, really tough day, right? She has this terrible day. She gets home, her daughter is singing, and she loves her daughter very much. And she loves when her daughter sings, but it just really gets under her skin at this particular time. And so the mom turns to the daughter and she's like, would you just stop singing? Your voice is terrible anyway. You're driving me crazy. Please just go away. Okay. Even though the mom doesn't mean that hurtful, deep emotional attack, the daughter takes it as, oh my gosh, my voice sucks. Mom doesn't want to hear me sing. That's the black magic. And now this veil stays over the daughter's head for years until it's faced and addressed. That's what we're talking about here. And that's only part of, one of the 4 agreements, but you're absolutely right. And this goes back to, you guys have to realize as adults, you have at any point in your life, not just an adult, but as adults, you've matured enough to realize that you have the power to accept or reject anybody's thoughts, feelings, opinions of you. What does that look like? Oh, Miles, you think that I look funny today? Hey, Miles, I respect your opinion and you're entitled to it. I just don't agree with you. I look funny every day. It's not just today. Okay. So being able to take that and accept or reject somebody's thoughts or opinions, right? So again, thank you so much for sharing that. But one last thing I want to bring up to Andrea's point is it's based on our emotional interpretation. We all could be sitting in the exact same room together right now, going through the exact same situation. And when asked about it, every one of us will have a different emotional interpretation of that event. It doesn't make us right or wrong. It's just based on our experiences. You can think of this like that drawing where there's 2 people that meet on a sidewalk and they're both looking down at this number on the ground, and one guy sees a 6 and the other guy sees a 9. Neither of them are wrong. They're just coming from a different perspective. And so that's really important when we talk about boundary setting and realizing that somebody has a different emotional interpretation than us. Doesn't make it right or wrong. We have the mature power to accept or reject that thought, statement, or concern. So thank you for sharing. Yes, exactly. That black magic with children, 100%, because they haven't matured into the place of acceptance or rejection. And especially when we're the parent, that's the primary source, right? Awesome stuff. And we're going to open it up after this last one. Okay, guys. So energy drainers. Oh my goodness. This comes up so often. And here's the deal. I got to be real with you guys for a second. Energy drainers are so easy for us to see in other people, but they're really difficult for us to see in ourselves, aren't they? So it's not just people. It can be places. It can be things. It can be actions. It can be music. It can anything that's in our environment, anything in the conscious mind, that is taking energy away from our primary focus. Okay. So the first step is you want to list out what you think your energy drainers are. Does anybody have a good example of an energy drainer in your life right now that you know is an energy drainer? Just shout it out. I see smiles. I know you guys have them. Just shout out. What's that?
Instagram.
Yeah, social media, huge energy drainer. Do you know the average person spends over 3 hours a day on social media? What does that actually equate to in your life? Like, that is a massive energy drainer. What are some other ones?
Trying to do far too much in one day.
That's a big one. An energy drainer. So putting too much expectation on your daily tasks, right? Great one. What's another one?
My parents.
Absolutely. Now here's a real big topic here. Okay, because this one comes up all the time, especially on a limited poverty mindset. And here's what I mean by that. I work with people all the time that come from this place of, I'm in a limited poverty mindset, meaning I'm not making the money that I want, but all the people that I'm surrounded with are in the same thing. And usually that's family. And so they're like, you know what? On one side, I love and cherish my family. I don't want to remove them. I can't. They're my family. But guess what? If they're not contributing to your success and your goals, it's not that you need to remove them from your life. You just allocate time to when you spend with them. Okay. Doesn't mean that you're not going to see them, but I might not spend every single night with them because they're not having the type of conversations that are going to take you to the next level. So you're absolutely right, Brennan. Parents, family, friends, they can be energy drainers. It doesn't mean you should automatically cut them out completely. although I do recommend that in some scenarios. But what it does mean is that you're very intentional about the time spent with them. Okay. Great stuff, guys. So
And to Marlene's point, the conversations being had.
absolutely. 100%. The conversations that are being had, right? And here's the thing. There are going to be some rooms where you just don't agree with people. You just don't agree with them, right? Doesn't make you right or wrong. But if you know that you're going to constantly butt heads and you're never going to make that forward progress, don't constantly put yourself in those environments until you've developed the skill set to bring down the walls and have a conducive conversation. But the first step, and this again goes back to self-love, we all have energy drainers, whether it's social media, our circle of influence, our environment, whatever we're consciously putting into our daily lives, there are things that are taking away from our end result. List them out. You got to know what they are. Have a real conversation with yourself. List them down. The next part, and this may take more actualization, but how do you rectify these? You know, again, Brendan, when you take that scenario of your parents, well, you're not just going to say, oh, I'm just going to cut my parents out and never talk to them again. That's not a healthy outlet, right? You still need them in your life, but we want to be able to channel that energy in that environment. So listing out different options to rectify this from your daily routine. What's a good example of this on the parent side? What is a good way that you could rectify that scenario so that they're not draining your energy?
My wife and I have limited the amount of time that we see my parents, and we have made a point to not go deeper than surface level conversation. And I've also sent hard video messages to my dad to have hard conversations, because having them face to face would never ever happen. And so just putting in some boundaries, kind of like what we're talking about.
Beautiful. The biggest thing that you just shared there, Brennan, that stands out to me in all of this, intentionality. You've got to have extreme intentionality behind this. Here's what I mean by that. You don't want to just cold turkey your parents, right? But you're intentionally setting aside time when you spend with them. For example, let's say they're your next door neighbors, and you know that if you go over for dinner on a Monday night, that it's just going to drain you and they're going to get stuck in your head the rest of the week. Okay, cool. Monday through Thursday, I'm not going over there. That's intentionality. I'm not cutting them out of my life. I'll be more than happy to spend time with them on a Saturday when I'm clear of all my workload and I can just unwind and I can just walk right back next door or walk away. But it's the intentionality behind it, right? Any other examples or ways to rectify, guys, that you have on this example? Okay, cool. So the third part to this is, what can you contribute today? So I think making the list, that's a really, really good example. Just simply start by listing out your energy drainers. That's an actionable item that you can do today, right? What's another example of something that we could do today to address these energy drainers?
Keegan, for me, it's I already have a couple of very small projects so that they're stretched out over days instead of pounding everything into one day.
Beautiful. So breaking it down, right? Understanding the big picture and then breaking it down into actionable items that you can tackle today, right? Realizing that you're not going to create this beautiful self-love, this self-actualization overnight. It's a process. You just start with tiny bite-sized pieces and you bite off a little chunk today and you bite off a little chunk tomorrow and the next day. And before you know it, you've created this routine, this habit, this environment that is just a part of your identity. Beautiful stuff, guys. So any other questions, comments, concerns on energy drainers before I close out and open it up to the group? Okay, cool. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity for anybody else because we have some really brilliant minds in here. I'm curious if there are any other examples, any tips, tricks, anything you would like to share with the group in terms of self-love that we didn't cover today, because we only covered 3 areas of self-love. So I'm sure you guys have a bunch of other stuff. What would you like to share with the group? What questions do you have? What recipes do you have that work? Just anything that's attributable to self-love that can help somebody else.
I'll share.
Okay.
Okay, so this is like really putting myself out there to be super vulnerable, but when we talk about energy drainers, I think sometimes I am my worst enemy when it comes to, you know, depleting myself of energy. Sometimes I feel like I have too much on my plate and it becomes overwhelming. And then I just kind of let that overtake my productivity, whether it's as a mom or in my job. And I'm a banker, so I'm a mortgage banker, and it's a really tough industry right now. There's just a lot of pressure. I'm a commission-based employee and I'm a single mom. So I feel like there's a lot of outside factors that are impacting my life, and I can let that negativity get to me. And so I think having a really good support system and having those people that can check me when I'm getting to that negative place has been super helpful. So I would say, you know, my biggest takeaway is just being able to identify that sometimes I stand in my own way as an energy drainer. And then just, you know, I think I'm going to take this experience from this talk today and share. My biggest supporters are my best friend and my mom, and they know, you know, the challenges that I face on a daily basis. And so I think just sharing with them that I kind of need them in my corner to just to like pull me back in when I'm getting to that place. Is, you know, I'm really trying to work on growth and development within myself. So I think that this chat was super helpful just for me to, like, the light bulb started going off, which was why I was so quiet earlier. But thank you to everyone for your feedback, because it's kind of helping shed some light on some stuff that I would like to continue to work on.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I want to recognize your vulnerability there and kind of stepping out of your comfort zone. These are the little moments for all of us, not just you, Carissa, but these are the moments for all of us that help us grow, right? Facing the uncomfortable situations, the uncomfortable conversations, and just stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit. And then you think about this, and then you get to that place. So thank you for sharing. Does anybody have any feedback? I mean, there's a lot of nuggets that she just shared there, but does anybody have any feedback, you know, specifically when you have a ton on your plate and self-love is so relevant? Does anybody want to share that, anything that you would interject here for Carissa? Andrea?
I think that one of the things that I identify with is that mom part of what you were sharing, but also the thing that I'm going to say is that Brene Brown wrote, it's one of the things she's written that I really agree with, is that from the heart of vulnerability springs pure courage and innovation. And when we have the strength and courage to be vulnerable, we let people see who we are, where we're at, so that they can actually show up for us. It's a way of kind of signposting, hey, this is where I'm at. And when we have the courage to do that, people can show up. Like I'm sitting here going, okay, is she on LinkedIn now? Because before you were just somebody on Keegan's call, you know, that I'm here and I respect because you're on Keegan's call, but now I have something to identify and grasp. And so that ability to be vulnerable, I think I would encourage. And if I may, Keeg, there was something I wanted to segue from Bob's earlier statement. All right?
Of course, go for it.
Wait, I'm sorry, I heard my name, but was there a question? Or you have permission to say whatever you want to say about me or to me or whatever, you have permission.
I wanted to leap off of something you shared. So Bob had made a statement about about self-love in the context of where is it not showing up in my life? And I wanted to add to that, because I thought that was so valuable. And I wanted to add that, and something I really valuable in my life is that to ask that question, but then to, when there's some habit I'm trying to break and build a new one, to literally ask myself that question, how much do I love myself? For example, in my early 20s, I was a chocoholic, meaning I love chocolate, and I would literally eat way, way, way too much candy because I love chocolate. So one of the ways I broke that habit was when I went into the candy section, I made myself stop and go, how much do you love yourself? Because I didn't want to gain the weight and have the sugar rush and all that jazz. And so there were a couple ways I remedied that. I would ask that question and I think, is this loving my body? Well, no, it's not. So then I go buy myself flowers, or I go find a way more expensive chocolate that limited how much I could purchase. And so these just some mechanisms to help build those positive habits of how do we love ourselves, right? How are we showing up for ourselves? And I just wanted to share that with the group. That's all.
Beautifully said. Yeah, thank you for that nugget. I think there are a couple big things here from Carissa's statement, is that, there are a few little things. All right, let's take the concept of having too much on your plate and then finding difficulty to incorporate self-love because we have so many other things going on. We've got other lives we have to care about. We've got a career we have to uphold. We've got a house we have to upkeep. We have all these other things, right? So here's one thing that I want to share with you guys is that I do a lot of work with trauma victims and addiction victims. And the biggest thing that you'll realize, whether you're having doubt, worry, anxiety, depression, fear, whatever it is, any form of those, the best thing you can do for yourself is create unconditional love for yourself. Creating unconditional love for yourself. Now, I have a really simple 4-step exercise for this that I classify as self-worth. One of my favorites, very simple process. You got 4 steps, you go from top to bottom. One of the things in there, the 4th step, and you mentioned this, Carissa, is your support system. And so that's a really powerful nugget. When we say support system, the way that I do this is I simply get a sheet of paper, a Post-it note, whatever. I create a list of 1 to 15 names. I put all the people that are in my circle that I can rely on, people that I can call, text, email, whatever it is, stop by, whatever it is. I put their name and then I put what I really like speaking with them about. So you'll realize that some people you can talk, like, for example, I know that I can go to Bob and have the most in-depth conversation on spirituality with Bob, right? Like, I know that that's a person that if I needed that support in my spiritual life, I can rely on Bob, no question. So I have that on my list. I would put Bob's name down and then say, oh, I know Bob is just the best person for that spirituality conversation. When you create this list of your support system, it's a mechanism to help create that unconditional love. So that's one little nugget there, right? So unconditional love. Another thing is the organization concept. When you feel like you have too much on your plate, it is absolutely advantageous to break that down and organize it. Taking tiny bite-sized pieces. When you see the big picture at the end of the tunnel and you build that faith and confidence, knowing that you're going to get through it. You know how we know that you're going to? You've gotten through everything else in your life so far. And I bet you a lot more difficult times than what you're going through right now. So you got to realize that you have these systems, and organizing is going to help understand that breakdown from big picture to daily task. And that comes with clarity, right? Being very clear, succinctly clear on what that looks like, what it feels like. So we talked about the organization, we talked about the support system, and then here's one thing, guys, out of all of this, the best thing that you can do is discipline. That's really what it comes down to. The best indication of your own self-love is committing to discipline. Saying that you're going to do something because you know that it makes you feel a certain way and showing up and doing it, right? Has anybody here read the book Motivation is a Myth? The Motivation Myth, I would highly recommend it. Here's what, I'll simplify the entire book into a sentence. Motivation isn't real. The people that are motivated are the ones that are fat, lazy, and broke. I don't say that disrespectfully. Here's why. The people that are motivated don't do this long term because it's not a part of the identity. Motivation does not last, right? It's very short term. So what you have to realize, the best way to love yourself is to commit to discipline. Well, that goes back to everything that we just said with Carissa's example. You got to know what that looks like. If you're unclear on that end result, how can you show up every day and commit to it? You can't. You don't even know what it looks like. So first and foremost, you have to have extreme clarity on that end result. That comes through organization. You know what the big picture looks like. I'm going to get there 5 years from now,
It's
10 years from now,
tangible.
whatever. And you break it down into tiny actionable items each day. So it all comes back to that discipline component. But that was a good nugget. And I appreciate your vulnerability there, Carissa. There is so much good in that. Anybody else have anything that they would like to share before we, and I'm sorry that we're kind of at the end of time here. Anybody else have anything that they want to share in terms of the self-love, exercise, nuggets, anything to consider, tips, tricks, maybe an area that somebody can help? Bob?
Just quickly, again, I don't know how it will resonate with everybody, but it is personal for me. And I don't know how I had it, but I've always had it from my very beginning of consciousness, is that I am unconditionally loved. I am, right? There is no doubt. There is a creator or something bigger than me. And I'm not talking religion. I'm not talking God. I'm just talking that I know I am not here by accident. And it's only through unconditional love, and that I am unconditionally loved, no matter what I think of myself.
Beautiful.
And when I rely on that, it just helps me get through all of the moments.
100%. And that goes back to that original statement, right? We are all comprised of two things, matter and energy. Energy is that expression of love, right? We don't have energy. We are energy. So it's expressing what we are, and fundamentally we're love. Anybody else, any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? Ashley?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some encouragement that, every day is going to look different. And this is something that we all have to work at. Like, we're all a work in progress. You know what I mean? But the fact that we're doing it and we're putting in the work is what distinguishes us from others. And we're going to be better for it. We're working towards that ultimate self-love. You know what I mean? We're just not going to get it right every day. And that is okay. You're still doing your best if you're trying. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Absolutely. And that's why having these systems in place are so key, right? Because when you're clear on that big picture, on what self-love looks like to you and for you, then you can break it down into daily action items, right? Creating that unconditional self-love by expressing discipline, showing up and doing the things I said I would, being organized, having small tasks, not looking at this massive picture and feeling like it's insurmountable, right? Having the clarity and those support systems. So awesome stuff, guys. Any last minute thoughts before we close out? Great. So guys, I really appreciate everybody's thoughts, contributions today. I thought this was a great talk. I'm going to challenge everybody in here to find your own self-love today. Take a step back, whether it's expressing your boundary or having clarity on that end result, or maybe it's just simply creating a small list on a Post-it note for the energy drainers that you find in your day today. Whatever it is, do one little thing today to help get you closer to that unconditional love. I love you guys so much. Thank you for your time. Crush the rest of your week, and we'll talk soon.
Love you. Share the love, everybody. Share the love.
Love you all. Love you all. Have a great one. Keegan.
Share the love, guys.
Thank you
Talk
so
to you soon.
much. Thank you, guys.